When Homestuck Squared first came out, a lot of people were pretty hesitant, if not downright against the concept entirely. But I was on board from day one. I signed my soul away when I finished that comic, and for better or worse, I'm with it until the end of the line. More so than its predecessors, it's had a lot of ups and downs, and the first act of the story has only wrapped up after
6
years. For context, Homestuck had reached Act 5 in little over a year from its inception, so at this pace, we've got a long journey ahead of us. But I have higher hopes than ever for this story, and hang on every word that comes out. March 23rd, 2025 saw Act 1 end on a tremendous series of cliffhangers, finally transitioning out of the setup the epilogues left us with. What happens from here on out is anyone's guess, but in honor of 413, Homestuck's 16th anniversary, I thought I'd take a look back at how far Homestuck Squared has come before we take the first steps into Act 2. The story has been split in half in more ways than one. The comic must juggle the two worlds and their respective casts that the epilogues introduced. But more than that, the elephant in the room is the departure of the original team in 2020 and the arrival of the new team in 2023. There's a clear distinction between the art and writing before and after the hiatus, and yet the new team has been adamant that they don't aim to just throw out all their predecessors' work. All the while, the comic has been weighed down by legacy, for better or worse. The beloved original comic, the divisive epilogues, and the contentious first half. But even so, was it able to stick the landing? What could be done better in future acts? And does this comic exceed the original in certain areas? All these questions and more coming up next. Before I end this long-winded introduction, just two things. First off, even at my most critical, I have no hate for either team that worked on Beyond Canon, and I urge you to be respectful. Don't go hunt people down and harass them because I said I didn't like their work. And leave all that old fandom drama in the past where it belongs. Secondly, and this one should be a bit more obvious, but there will be spoilers inbound for Homestuck, the epilogues, and Homestuck Squared. Finally, if you like this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing. Homestuck is near and dear to me, and it'll keep popping up in my videos. With that, let's get into it. Beyond Canon launched as Homestuck Squared on October 25th, 2019. This came as a great shock, considering that the epilogues had dropped only 6 months prior. In the 3 years since the original comic ended, no indication was ever made that there would be a full-on sequel, only a follow-up in some form. We all thought it was over, and packed up our stuff to go home. Then out of the blue, not only does this new website appear, but it comes pre-packaged with 10 pages. And they're actual comic panels, not just text like the epilogues. They even brought back the suggestion box. I had never even seen one of these before. A few hours later, and even more pages dropped. Finally, the first news post rolled out. Just what the hell had happened? Turns out, Hussey had decided to hand the reins of the story over to a new team, consisting of previous collaborators and longtime fanfic creators. They were given a basic outline by Hussey and allowed to fill in the rest. The epilogues had discussed themes of canonicity. What makes a story legitimate within an established setting? What kinds of stories do people care about? And what makes one story matter more than the other? Building on these themes, the new team declared this comic Beyond Canon. Just one possibility of how the story could go from here. What significance it had as a sequel was up to you, the audience, to grapple with. I'd elaborate on this point, but I already made a video on it. This grand philosophical question was met with some murmurs and awkward silence. Most people were just here for the Homestuck. And so, with a monthly update schedule, the comic continued. The epilogues had shown 2 possible outcomes for the characters of Earth-C. Meet, where they were forced to face their destiny and deal with Dirk becoming an anime villain, and Candy, where they decided to live out a slice of life, only to realize how horribly unequipped they are to be adults. Neither ended well, but both were revealed to exist simultaneously. Meat was the real world, but Candy was created and preserved within a pocket dimension, blocked off from the rest of reality. 90% of the story is focused on Candy, but I found Meat to be the more interesting setting. It sees Dirk, Rose, and Terezi journey to the planet Deltritus, where they begin crafting a world from scratch that will play the next grand session of Spurb, continue the cycle that they had once sought to escape. Dirk's been a bit vague about his reasons, but claims that it's their purpose. They're setting the stage for the most important session in history, and his comrades are strung along for their own personal reasons. Dirk and Rose create new species to populate the world, while Terezi mopes around and questions if she really wants a part of all this. As a character with a strong sense of justice, compromising her morals like this doesn't sit right with her, but she's uniquely equipped to shape the future while in the gods' good graces. More than this, she's made a vow to bring back John no matter the cost, a touchstone in her moments of doubt. Dirk is pretty firm and unapologetic about his intentions. Having reached the status of ultimate self, he has absolute confidence that he knows what is best for the world. He's willing to play the villain, and is prepared for his friends to strike him down when the time comes. But the big question mark here is Rose. As much as she clashes with Dirk over fostering the world of Deltritus, she still seems to lag behind, not as in control as the Prince of Heart, especially as it was Dirk that swayed her to take this journey, to leave her wife. Is Rose playing the long game, or just another pawn? She shows less awareness of Dirk's narration than Terezi, and the two argue about waking up her original body, now put into stasis. As of now, though, the question remains. In hot pursuit of the fledgling gods are the rest of the cast, hurt by the betrayal and out for revenge. They only know the half of what's going on, but if they don't act soon, Rose may be lost forever. Nothing really happens with this crew, to be honest. Always cool to see on-screen Dave Cat, and their updated designs are pretty cool. Jade is finally expressing autonomy, kind of. Also in hot pursuit are refugees from Candy that managed to escape. Candy Dave, now powered up as a cyborg, Aradia, and alternate Calliope, who's also the same person in Jade's body, micromanaging both revenge crews. They also don't do much, but have a few interesting conversations about free will. Alternate Calliope, as the mastermind behind Candy, is even more cryptic than their megalomaniacal counterpart. We know they're trying to curb Dirk's influence, to stop his hijacking of the narrative, but they similarly view everything and everyone else as subordinate to their goals, something Jade is quick to call them out on. And that's pretty much everything that happens on the Meat side, across both halves of the story. We end off Act 1 with Dirk, Rosebot, and Terezi preparing to jump to the future using bullshit, having set the stage for the world to come. It's a cool setup, especially as the little teases of a new species trickle in. But it does feel like the Meat storyline just isn't the focus of Act 1. Fingers crossed that we get something more substantial in Act 2. Moving on to the other side of the coin, when reading the epilogues, I went for Meat first, and expected Candy to be the boring fluff route. Boy, was I wrong. The characters in comic correctly diagnose the setting as a funhouse mirror version of Meat, as everyone gets married, has children, and takes sides in a war for the planet's future. The subtext of this war plot is so loud, it's practically just text, being written against the backdrop of so many dramatic political changes in the US. It's commentary on people's approach to movements much bigger than themselves. The old team was very vocal on social media and in the Perfectly Generic podcast about their political stances, which bleed right into the plot. Carcat's demands that John should either sit down and listen instead of half-assing it were not bother at all. Roxy and Jake's indecisiveness on turning against Jane being legitimate strategic liabilities. The trolls generally taking the war more seriously as a matter of life and death, given their rights are the ones being threatened. I don't see the political focus as a negative development. After all, the former Spurb players are literal gods and world leaders on Earthsea. Having spent the original comic as teenagers playing video games, it makes sense that as they transition into adults, the harsh truths of adulthood should rear their ugly head. Some friends grow up into awful people. Building a better world isn't an easy or pleasant process, and requires more social upheaval than most are comfortable with. And let's face it, a broken system can't be fixed from within, playing by the rules. Media that showcases revolution against corrupt systems doesn't often capture how uncomfortable it can feel to turn against your friends and neighbors. It's with that backdrop that Candy sees our main characters unhappily and awkwardly fumbling their way through a revolution. Jane is Candy's main antagonist, stripped of all redeeming qualities, playing the cartoon villain foil to Dirk's anime villain. She has no regard for her soldiers' lives, is an abusive wife and mother, and literally tortures dogs and children. Well, a dog child, but I'll count that as both. She already manipulated her way to power in the epilogues, so her goal here is to squash the rebellion, foiling their plans wherever possible. For a good chunk of the story, that's just maneuvering around a double hostage situation. Rose and Kanaya have Jane's son Tavros, and Jane has Jade's daughter Yiffy. Midway through, around the time of the team change, Jane shifts gears to capture the Point, a supposed rebellion superweapon. More on that in a bit. There's a lot of fallout from the epilogues to deal with events like Dave's disappearance, Gamzee's death, and Vriska's return coming to the forefront. John and Jake continue their respective character arcs as they find themselves reinvigorated, ready to help the war effort. However, Jake has to grapple with his own cowardice, whereas John is completely out of his depth, out of touch with the reality of the war. The former decides to turn against Jane as a double agent, but still finds himself unable to say it to her face, being pulled around by a returning brain ghost Dirk. One of the highlights of the act is the reveal that Dirk really is just a figment of Jake's lonely imagination. The man himself is gone, and Jake needs to stand up for himself, make the hard decisions, and live with the consequences without someone telling him to. On the other hand, John is way too excited. Throughout the epilogues, he had trudged sadly through life, depressed at how the world had changed around him. Now, given a chance to make a difference, he's on the right track, but not for the right reasons. A nostalgia for days of adventure gone by, even as the war puts his son's life at risk. The children gradually take center stage as the new main characters. Where Acts 1 through 4 had the beta kids, and Act 6 had the alpha kids, the next generation of adolescents is often called the Omega Kids. Harry Anderson, the fashionista theater kid son of John and Roxy. Vrissy, the adopted clone daughter of Rose and Kanaya. Tavros, the timid son of Jane and Jake. And Yiffy, the secret rebellious daughter of Jade and Rose. That last kid proves to be a big source of drama, both in-universe and out. When Jane believes the rebellion has kidnapped her son, she ups the ante by kidnapping Jade's daughter, bringing a long-kept secret to the surface. Not only did Rose act as a surrogate for Jade, but she did so without telling her wife. For 15 years. Out of everyone that she could have trusted to keep the secret, Jade decided to trust their greatest enemy, Jane. Granted, at the time, things were just tense and not all-out war, but now it comes back to bite them all in the ass. I don't know why the team hates Rosemary, but they really pull strings to keep these women apart. Kanaya is rightfully furious, Jade is tripping over herself, and Rose feels no guilt at all. In fact, she keeps trying and failing to pull off these Death Note-esque mind games, acting like she's some mastermind, when really she's just ruining everything. You want to be Dirk so bad, bro. We get it. Roxy and Calliope have been working in secret on a device called, and I feel myself vomit saying this, the plot point. They're not sure what it does, but they've discovered that Candy is cut off from the rest of the narrative, and that there's no way out other than through this thing. Thankfully redubbed the point, it's a portal to the singularity at the heart of Candy that contains a weird Evangelion-esque dimension. Vriska, as the only living character from outside the plot of Candy, is the one meant to enter it, where she speedruns 8 years of character development. This gives her a convenient power-up, age-up, and trims the more abrasive aspects off of her personality. It's not like anyone else was well-adjusted, but people were getting sick of her better-than-you attitude, to the point where Vrissy's idolization had turned to disappointment. This reckoning had been a long time coming, and honestly, good for her. Some therapy and a new outfit will change your life. Leading the charge in the rebellion is Karkat, who's evolved into a walking, talking Metal Gear Solid reference. It's a good look on him, though. It's great to see how he and Mina have both helped each other mature, with Karkat growing into the leader he always struggled to be, and Mina learning to plant her feet and commit her strength towards a cause. Trying to run a serious movement with overdramatic and flaky commanders isn't easy, but Karkat's never not been stressed. It all comes to a head in the final climactic flash. Break. The battle begins over the point, and Jane's army goes head-to-head with Karkat's. Explosions, mayhem, superpowers, the works. The Omega Kids get their first real taste of action, having been carted around by the adults all throughout Act 1. The real star of the show is Vriska, finally learning to accept and forgive herself, who bursts out of her cocoon in a new super form. Or the old one with a new coat of paint. I can't really tell. Whatever the case, she makes quick work of Jane's forces, saving the day and telling our heroes that they need to get the hell out of Dodge. But the adults are still so mired in their soap opera drama that only the kids hear out Vriska's offer to escape Candy, where Dirk's new session surely awaits them. And with their children departed, we've likely got yet another group heading for Detritus. I've got a lot to say about this comic, so let's get the bad stuff out of the way first. One of the biggest controversies that the epilogues and beyond canon have faced was writing and characterization. Namely, characters doing questionable things, and the story framing them as sympathetic. Chapter 8 seems to be the most infamous example, ranging from Vriska beating up reporters to Rose and Jade conceiving, hiding, and naming Yiffy behind everyone's back. I don't dislike characters that change into more bitter and unlikable versions of themselves, as long as it's executed well. But there were times that I was put off that I supposedly couldn't judge the characters for things that they did, because the authors were adamant that they were in the right. Vriska is my favorite character, but the unironic Vriska did nothing wrong vibe was a bit much. Also, it just felt like these characters fucking hated each other. More than just drama, conversations between Harry and Vrissy that didn't seem at all like they loved each other. I don't remember a single interaction Yiffy has where she isn't insulting the other characters. And I see where she gets it. One mother is endlessly whiny, the other is comically psychopathic. Once again, in such troubling times, I don't expect everyone to get along peachy, but I'd at least like to see the kids get along, to convince me that they're friends. This problem got better in the latter half, but hasn't entirely disappeared. Another notable problem is the pace of the comic. I touched on this in the Canon video as well, but dropping down to monthly updates with such a stretched out story means that months can pass before a storyline is followed up on. If an update is just filled with conversations and doesn't really progress the plot, the gap until the next one creates this feeling that nothing is happening. This one's a bit harder to fix, as advancing the plot every month might feel more exciting to the live reader, but will make the story feel rushed to the binge reader. I don't mind the pace as much when I go back and reread, but there's a real-time component to the comic that can't be ignored. Perhaps spreading out the pages over the course of the month might mitigate this, but I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I would complain about the lack of meat, but I have a feeling they're being intentionally firm with the breaks. Allowing the candy cast to get caught up will allow us to spend Act 2 focusing on the new session. At least, I hope it will. I also haven't mentioned the bonus content, and for good reason. The original team released side stories that required a Patreon subscription to access. They're interesting, and one I was actually hoping we'd see a bit more of, but they never really went anywhere. Some people were mad that parts of the comic were locked behind a paywall. I was a sub from the beginning, so I don't know. Get your money up, not your funny up. My biggest issue, though, and one that's a holdover from the epilogues, is the meta shit. Yes, Homestuck had plenty of fourth wall breaks, and ones that even impacted the plot, but it never felt truly disruptive. There was still an overall story you could tell separate from the author intrusions and Deus Ex Machinas. If you took them out, it wouldn't feel like the story was unexplainable. But the Successor series relies on it, throws physical logic out the window, and lets characters do whatever they want because they're aware of canon. At least before, you could say things happened because the game willed it to be, because there was a sense of destiny. But now worlds can cease to exist because they're not relevant. Vriska is the only one who can enter the plot point because she has narrative clout. I mean, all you had to say was she can only enter it because she's not from this world. That's all you had to say. I'm sorry, I have a lot of respect for both teams, but this is just ridiculous. Dirt can alter time because, and I quote, bullshit, with a capital B. At least the epilogues had a bit of subtlety to it. I beg of you, please tone this down. Acknowledging lazy writing does not redeem it. Okay, now that I got all of the hate out of the way, what's good about this comic? A lot. The art is gorgeous. If you can only take one positive thing from this comic, it's gotta be the art. Details, color, shading. The team swap resulted in a darker, more angled style compared to the soft pastel look it had before. But I'm still a big fan. The composition of panels, the custom sprite work for the visual novel, it's always a treat for the eyes. And that especially extends to the character designs, with everyone getting colorful new outfits that remain faithful to their original styles, while showing how much they've changed. As much as I've shit on Yiffy, I dig the punk British aesthetic, and it fits her character perfectly. Even before the character said it out loud, her resemblance to Dave is poetic and disturbing. Granted, Beyond Canon's take on the classic sprite look is a bit uncanny in places, but I'm not gonna lie and say the original was a golden standard for art. I've always been a fan of Ultimate Dirk, from his design to his abilities to his motivations. He's not a good person, sure, but he's an entertaining villain, turning all his friends against him because he knows the story can't continue without a conflict. In a less metaphysical sense, continuing the cycle of Spur because it's destined to happen anyway, so it might as well be on his terms. Leaning into his role as a god by designing a species, a society, specifically for the purpose of playing his perfect session. I haven't been this invested in one of the comic's villains since Doc Scratch, and technically, the old cue ball is in there somewhere. There's several more characters who've been elevated to favorite character status as well due to consistently great writing. Sullix, Mina, Meet Roxy, always a joy to see them on screen. As mentioned, the Omega Kids are gradually taking center stage as the comic's new main characters. And I'm here for it. The glimpses we've seen of their unique character quirks makes me want to know more about them. And now that they're finally free of their overbearing parents, we might see some real development. Hopefully the writers show more moments of friendship between them going into Act 2. We also have the slightest tease of a Del Triton, whatever form they may take, reaching out to Vrissy. I'm beyond excited for that. I had to look up what buccal mass means, but apparently it's related to mollusks. Maybe we're about to be on some real banana shit and see the 48-player Squiddle session Hussey has been teasing all these years. Only time will tell. When not being bogged down by meta shit, I am impressed by the creativity of both teams. Sequels are plagued by unoriginality, and yet the twin settings are very distinct from Homestuck proper. Even if we're heading back to Suburb, we get through an entire act without seeing the game once. We don't spend the whole time dwelling on nostalgia either. No Ian Flynn-esque, remember when we were on the land of heat and clockwork? A lot of what's here now was set up by the epilogues, particularly in Candy's case, but wasn't quite fleshed out. The culture of the gods as celebrities, the slight instability to Jane's political control, the mounting dread as our heroes rush to face Dirk. And while a bit underwhelming at times, the old side stories give an even grander scope to the events at play. To sum up a long and overcomplicated video, I'm excited to see where this story goes next. Some important shit went down in Act 1, but it still feels like build-up to the real show. The new session of Spurb, played by the Omega Kids and Dirk's new species. A mad dash by everyone and their mother to stop the ultimate villain from doing whatever he plans to do. We've had 5 years to build the hype, and frankly, I'm more than ready to see the payoff. The comic has certainly struggled to find its footing, as it changes to reflect the world of the 20s rather than that of the 10s. I don't attribute its more divisive elements to its politics, but rather the story's attempts to defend certain characters and actions, as if the slightest bit of nuance will confuse the fandom. Which it will, to be fair. I've seen way too many Reddit posts asking, so how do people feel about June Egbert, to believe fandom is capable of being accepting, or reading between the lines. But whoever you want to point fingers at, the tension between writer and audience grew so deep and entrenched within the story itself that dialogue would start defending against outside critiques. John explaining multiple times why he watched his house burn down, and Hussey themselves coming out of the woodwork to defend Yiffy. The breaking point in this tension killed the comic's original run, which leads me to the analytical elephant in the room. I like the new team better. Or at least, I like how the story feels under the new team. I watched the shit show happen live, and I'll state it 100 times that the old team gets it worse than they deserve. I spoke to the previous director before, and personally found them to be very kind. I just think the scope of the project, especially with fandom expectation, was too large for them to handle. Their careers relied on a steady flow of Patreon income, and when money got tight and fans started complaining, it likely didn't feel fun anymore. In contrast, there seems to be more joy in what the current team is doing. Every time they do AMAs and news posts, there's a passion there that hasn't yet been killed, and it carries over to the story. There's not this bitterness, a feeling that the comic needs to explain itself, and so the drama between characters feels more natural. Beyond Canon is, by nature, a product of its circumstances. If you abandon this comic in the first few months, and are adamant that it's not real Homestuck anymore, I urge you to give it a second chance. I can't promise it's perfect, or that it's just like the comic you grew up with. But even at its supposed worst, I've never been motivated to click off. I'm on this train for life, and I hope you'll come aboard and join me. Thanks for watching. If this video comes out on 4/13, happy 4/13. If it's late, then, well, I tried. Whoops. The last time I went openly and unapologetically Homestuck, people seemed to like it, so I thought I'd celebrate the end of Act 1 in style. The word count is getting kinda long on this essay, and I really need to hit the restroom, so I'm gonna end the script here. Future me, make some random sounds to let the credits go on for longer.